Scaling the Summit is a podcast developed by UN Global Pulse and the United Nations Innovation Network. The podcast explores essential elements around scaling innovations in development and humanitarian contexts. It's drawing on relevant innovation research and particularly experiences from a wide range of practitioners. And we hope our conversations will give insight into what it takes to move from an idea to a fully scaled innovation project within the United Nations system. Now, today's episode is very much concerned with a key challenge around funding innovation for scaling. Innovation teams need funding to scale their solutions, but that journey to scale is often a very uncertain one. So identifying specific funding against key deliverables might not be an appropriate approach. Instead, there's a need for flexibility to allow for the uncertainty in innovation. But at the same time, simply throwing money at innovation projects poses its own challenges, not least for donors used to project-specific frameworks. So what options exist for providing flexible funding? Are there emergent good practice models around this funding linked to successful scaling? Well, to help us explore these questions today, we're very fortunate to have with us two people with a great deal of experience and insight into this question of funding. First of all, Silja Leinonen, who's Senior Advisor on Development Policies with the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then Gladys Morales, who's Global Head of Innovation at IFAD, which is the United Nations International Fund for Agricultural Development. So welcome both. Thank you so much for sharing some time and experience with us. Perhaps I could start with a fairly important question. What's the problem? We've got this challenge of funding against the uncertain background of innovation, but in your experience, what's the problem or possibly problems?
Thank you so much, John, for the question. When addressing the problem of financing, I think that we need to take a systematic approach to funding. So it's not only about the financing, it's also about the architecture in the organizations. It's about the strategy and the frameworks that have been established, but it's also about culture. Because if the institutional culture and the leadership of the organization don't recognize the importance of having systematic funding for innovation and treating innovation just as other programs are treated in terms of having a sustainable source of financing, then that's the first problem that any organization faces. The other problem is, while you should have a systematic approach to the funding that is sustainable, at the same time, you should recognize that, as you were saying in your introduction, innovation is not straightforward. So while in other operations within a corporation or within an organization, you know that the design will be followed by an implementation, and that will have more or less certain results. With innovation, you don't have that level of certainty. And it's good not to have that level of certainty, because you do need to forecast that there will be failures. And when we are learning from those failures can actually lead to tremendous successes and tremendous transformational results. But for that, we need to be accepting the possibility of failure and embracing not only failure, we need to embrace the lessons that derive from failure and seeing failure as steps towards future successes.
That's lovely, thank you. And you've set it out well. I think that it's a challenge at a systemic level. It's got to be systematic. It's not a single thing. It's something we need to be strategic about. But as you've highlighted, there is this balancing act between the world of uncertainty which innovators face and the need then to provide flexibility. I'd like to come back to the lessons from failure in a moment, but Silja, first, could I pass to you and ask your thoughts on what's the problem?
Indeed, and thank you very much, John, for the invitation, and very happy to have this discussion around a very important topic. Gladys already mentioned very good points in terms of a systematic approach to scaling, and I think this is one of the key ingredients to make innovation scale in development going forward. And I think it's about having a scaling mindset also within the international community, and taking this mindset to practice in the way we shape our strategies and in the way we fund and support different types of projects and interventions. This is one key point. Then another point would be on cooperation and developing funding pathways. I think that no donor alone can succeed in scaling innovation to global scale. So indeed, this requires having more cooperation between different various innovation supporters, financiers, and allowing a greater mix of financial means available to successful projects. Some funders might be more equipped to support the early stage of innovation, and then others better equipped to support the further scaling of these projects.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. And again, you're touching back to what Gladys was saying about the culture, the mindset, the whole approach. But a very interesting point you're making about funding pathways, plural, and multiple actors. We often say about innovation as we scale it, it's not a solo act. It's a multiplayer game. And what you're saying there, I think, really bears that out. We need to think about drawing many different players into a system. Perhaps I could use that to sort of spring into asking you, in your experience, what's worked well? Can you think of some examples? Can you elaborate on those key points you've already highlighted where it's worked quite well?
So, John, if I could start with that, during the pandemic, we were in the middle of lockdown, and everybody started asking, what can we do to overcome this new challenge? And since the pandemic, there was a really good article towards the end of 2023 in The Economist about this perma crisis and this how the world has changed, and we are moving from crisis to crisis, and there is this mistrust now in the economy in general, but abundantly in the digital economy. So going back to the pandemic and going back to the lockdown, the international financial institutions got together. So we were a really small group of people from the innovation units of the IFIs. That's short for international financial institutions. And we were asking ourselves questions about how can we contribute to overcome this new challenge that was unprecedented. We, in our lives, none of us had faced something like that before. And one thing that we decided to do more consciously was, let's really learn from each other. Let's support each other in efforts to embrace the learning, embrace the knowledge that we could share, and those lessons that in the experience that each of the organizations was bringing to the table. But then also sending a clear message to our leadership that in situations of crisis, in situations of overwhelming challenges, that's when innovation is most important. So what worked really well for us, and that group that started back in 2020, was let's start by really sharing lessons. Let's start by really sharing experiences. And when each of us were, when we were facing a particular challenge, big or small, we knew that we could pick up the phone and say, have you had a similar situation in your organization? How did you face it? That has added tremendous value to our work, but also has saved us a lot of time and resources in experimenting with things that maybe others have already addressed and have been either successful or have failed. But learning from those failures is quite important. So it worked well because we started from learning and from knowledge sharing. Then that translated into more concrete examples of co-designing open innovation challenges to identify and test technologies, but also innovations that were deriving from traditional knowledge, so that we could, that traditional knowledge could actually catalyze innovation. So we started from again, knowledge, to having more examples of co-financing, co-design of open innovation, trying to identify synergies, and very consciously identifying also solutions that could be mainstreamed into our programs of loans and grants. We launched our first Open Innovation Challenge for artificial intelligence in climate resilience, for climate resilience in rural areas last year. We have now identified through a very competitive selection process teams that will be implementing these solutions within our programs, bringing those teams also to different geographical exposures. So something that has worked really well in Latin America, but we're getting them exposure also in other geographies in Africa and Asia, identifying projects where they can also apply these solutions, and then therefore, also bundling up innovation, replicating innovation that has been successful. The vision for the future is for us to have a common facility to test, first identify, then test, and then scale up innovation. Very quickly, there was a panel recently where the IFS came together, and I really liked what one of our colleagues said. She said, to do the proof of concept, you need tens of thousands of dollars. To work on the pilots, you need hundreds of thousands of dollars. But to really scale up innovation, you need billions. So there is no organization, there is no entity in the world that can do it on its own. We really need to work in partnerships, and we really need to work in partnerships that are true partnerships and not under the label of a major organization that benefits from the visibility. So that's another thing that has worked for us. We white label our collaboration. So instead of calling it, a collaboration by IFAD or a collaboration by the World Bank or a collaboration, so the initiatives have the label of moonshots for development, so that we are all committing to work towards, that joint effort, and nobody's getting more or less recognition. We're equally contributing to the same cause, which is identifying, testing, and really scaling up innovations.
Wow, that's tremendous. Thank you, Gladys. And I think several things emerged there, not least this idea of a community of practice. It is a multiplayer game, and it makes sense not to keep reinventing wheels, but to build on what we're learning collectively on, as you've said there, something which is, we're talking about serious scale, billions of dollars. It's a big effort to make a difference. Celia, can I turn to you and ask your experience? What lessons have you learned? How do you see this thing developing, and perhaps some success stories along the way?
Thank you very much. And indeed, Finland has had a long-term focus on innovation in its development cooperation, and we're also a long-standing supporter of the UN's innovation agenda, and a supporter of the UN Global Pulse. We host the office of the UN Global Pulse here in Helsinki. We've had also a long history of supporting innovation ecosystem development in our partner countries and regions. And I would maybe raise from this work a few learnings. One is to focus on innovation enablers, strong hubs, strong hubs, accelerators, incubators, and support organizations within an ecosystem, because they are in a very key role in enabling innovation and the scale of innovation within the country context. More broadly, I would say that these innovation enabling organizations have a key role also in ensuring that innovators can scale abroad, so to meet regional needs, to meet global needs. So there has been in Finnish work a lot of focus on creating these functional innovation enablers, allowing them to connect with regional counterparts, international networks. And this is one key learning that we've had. Gladys made a very important point on cooperation between development finance institutions, international finance institutions. And I would add there also the need to draw other relevant stakeholders dealing with development into the cooperation as we move forward. So we might talk about then UN entities, bilateral donors, even those stakeholders who are perhaps not so active yet in the development innovation field. So in particular, talking about private investors. And the key issue, I think, here overall is to find the mechanisms to draw in private capital to solve the key development challenges. So indeed, very much also talking for this increased cooperation between the various relevant organizations that will have a stake in solving our common challenges. Yes, and I wanted to make the last point of really mapping and systematically documenting good practices around scale. And I think the UN Global Pulse here is making excellent work in this space, and also listening into what Gladys said about sharing between financiers the best practices and really having adequate documentation and evidence around this issue is important.
John, if I may, this is getting really, really interesting. So if I could take also continue with this conversation with Celia about these communities of practice and working together. I think that that's a really important message. You know, we all are aware of donor fatigue, and it's increasingly difficult for donors to identify where to devote resources when you have agencies, even within the United Nations, that are competing for resources. So that's why it's so important what Celia is describing about true cooperation, true initiatives that are designing from the beginning in collaboration, where you don't have that competition, but you have true collaboration. Extremely key, extremely important is leveraging on those private impact investors, leveraging on the day-to-day consumer, people like us. Every choice that we make can have an impact on a sustainable world. So for that reason, I think it's also important not only to work with a plethora of stakeholders, but also to ensure that, yes, we leverage on these communities of practice. In fact, that's one of the first things that I did when I joined IFAD, was to establish the IFAD Innovation Network, and to ensure that it was not going to compete with the UN Innovation Network, but that we were building complementarities between the UN Innovation Network and the IFAD Innovation Network. So going back to financing, IFAD is a fund of the United Nations, international financial institution, but with access to capital markets. We are a AA plus international credit-rated international financial institution. What that means is that we have access to those capital markets. We issue bonds, and people can make investments, governments can make investments in those bonds. So those are alternative sources of financing that are helping us to develop also alternative ways of creating this funding. But all of that needs to be accompanied by communication campaigns and by advocacy campaigns, so that when you go to your bank and you're making choices about how is that you want your money invested, people know that they can make a conscious choice that those investments are going to be impact investments. So each of us plays a role in building a better, a more just, equitable, and inclusive world.
Lovely. There's some really powerful points from both of you. Perhaps I could pull back from what Celia was saying. One word you used, Celia, was ecosystem. And that's something that's come up again and again when we've looked at the challenge of moving things to scale. Innovations don't just happen on their own. They need an ecosystem around them. And I think it's very interesting, your point, Celia, about enabling, innovation enabling, creating, convening, assembling, helping innovators by providing that broader infrastructure. And then both of you have come back once again to this idea of sharing what we know. It's a huge challenge. We really need to scale innovations for impact. It makes sense not to reinvent the wheel, to share what we know. But the third thing which really strikes me, and perhaps I can move on to pose a question around it, this isn't a simple passive process. It's not like an ATM where you push the buttons and the money comes out. It's very different. And what I'm hearing from both of you is there's a great deal of innovation on the funding, on the donor side. And you've given some examples, both of you. Could you elaborate a little on what else we need, the experiments that you're involved in, for example, in drawing in private capital, but what innovations might we need and what are you doing on the funding side?
Well, yes, John, I think this is a very critical question, and a lot is happening already in terms of innovating around finance. Many good practices emerging around blended finance models, which combine public and private funds, around public funds and guarantees that de-risk investment and draw more private investment, and around completely maybe new financial mechanisms that align with the SDGs. Finland, of course, is active also on this front, and for instance, our National Development Finance Institution, FinFund, which is an active investor in sectors such as, for instance, digital infrastructure and digital solutions, does cooperate and co-finance actively around large-scale digital infrastructure and solutions in Africa and other regions. And the model is really to be part of a larger investor group to bring solutions to scale even regionally. They might be around mobile money services for financial inclusion targeted especially to women, or examples like this. We are also proud to be supporting IFAD in its work on new innovative blended finance vehicles, specifically the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Finance Mechanism. Finland is an investor in that mechanism with 32 million euros. And what is very interesting about this initiative or vehicle is the way it combines also private sector money and guarantees and conditionally repayable loans. There are many interesting examples emerging in this space, and as we already before had a lot of dialogue around the need to continue drawing financiers together on these new platforms of cooperation, and I think that's the key moving forward.
Lovely. That's really helpful. And we often talk of a model of innovation not just being about the things we offer, maybe our processes, but all sorts of other things. And you've given some great examples of new target markets, of new mechanisms, of new partnerships, some great ideas. It gives a sense of innovation happening in this sector. Gladys, could you share some of your thoughts around this?
Thank you, John. And Celia, thank you so much for that presentation of our collaboration on blended finance. That was quite comprehensive. We have a very close collaboration with the government of Finland. In fact, I just had lunch with the representative of Finland to the United Nations here in Rome this week. And the other thing that we were addressing is, of course, we want to build all these mechanisms, but reporting on how effective these mechanisms are. that's also a priority of both IFAD and the government of Finland, and we are working together. And the reporting needs to be based on data and evidence that are verifiable. That's also a priority for us. Why is that important? At the World Economic Forum this year, for example, we discussed how, again, there is mistrust, right? How can we work towards building credibility and building back that trust from the general public, from institutions, from the private sector into the work that development agencies and the work that social innovation and social entrepreneurs are doing? Well, one way that we are addressing that is through frontier technologies. We have at IFAD, for example, an initiative that is called Trace, and it is blockchain by IFAD. And what Trace aims to achieve is, through blockchain technology, give traceability to payments. So by offering these traceability solutions, we can tell investors what percentage of the funding that they're contributing really gets invested in our target groups. So that's fundamental. But together with that traceability, we are providing also transparency in the transactions. And what transparency means for an investor, it means that you're fighting corruption and you're fighting also financial mismanagement, because each payment is traced. And for people that are listening to us and understand blockchain technology, they also know that blockchain is immutable. Once the record is created, you cannot change that record. And the nodes are completely decentralized. And what that means when you have the decentralized nodes is the governance is also decentralized. So that helps us building that trust back into the systems, that into the way that we invest. It's also a protection for international organizations, because it also contributes to our reputation, not only in the institutions, but also in the statements that we make that are verifiable with data and with evidence. And in the future, who we engage with, that's also a way to protect us from that. But that has also to be supported by a very strong procurement system, and IFAD has invested in a digital open procurement platform also to build those guarantees, not only in terms of transparency, in terms of true competitiveness, but ensuring that the partners we engage with, partners, vendors, suppliers, etc., are adhering to ethical standards, are adhering to sustainable practices. So it's a combination of anti-crime, anti-fraud, using frontier technologies for transparency, for to fight corruption, financial mismanagement, but also having a procurement system that is efficient, transparent, and effective. So it's again, it's a combination of all these factors.
Lovely. Again, great examples. I think it's very clear innovation is happening in this funding, this financing world, not least, and I think very importantly, in the area of building trust. It's hugely about resting on that. We've covered a lot of ground, and nicely, a lot of convergence in what you've both been saying. But perhaps can we end with one last reflection on this innovation challenge? Imagine for a moment I'm in possession of a magic wand. I'm the Christmas fairy or the genie who's come out of the bottle. I can grant you a magic wish. If there was one thing that you could ask me to do that would make a difference to the way in which we can scale innovations, particularly supporting them from the funding side, what would you wish for?
Yes, thank you. I think there is this need of a mindset change, clearly, around the notion of scaling. And this would perhaps require moving away from a project-based world to a world of platforms and cooperation and open dialogue and sharing. We are, I think, already headed that way, but there is maybe a need to still push for this type of thinking.
Yeah, lovely. And that's coming through very strongly in what both of you have been saying. but encouragingly there seems to be convergence around or momentum around that collaboration. Gladys, what's your magic wish?
My magic wish is, I think we have learned a lot from each other. I would like to see more initiatives like the one that we're participating right now in ensuring that that knowledge flows. But key messages are that even when we are doing these open innovation challenges, that those open innovation challenges are stage gated, that we are managing risk, that we are delivering results, and that we're backing up our statements with data and evidence. That's quite important. And that's, I think, something that we share with our partners, that vision that any statements that we make are verifiable, that with data and evidence, that we are reporting on the impact, on the results, from the investments that we're making. But if I could have a wish and a dream to become true, I would like really our agencies to think of not IFAD, not UN Global Pulse independently, but truly work together and co-design, contribute our learning and unique value proposition. Because the beauty of the United Nations is that each of us has a very clear mandate. And if we really develop that mandate and we deliver towards that mandate and we work together in those directions without really creating that competition that we were describing before, then we can really achieve a lot together. So that my wish for the future is for the UN, for the international financial institutions, and for the social innovators that are out there. Very quickly, again, data here, John. Social entrepreneurship contributes $2 trillion annually to the global economy. If you put that social entrepreneurship sector together, that's bigger than the apparel industry, with a lot of opportunity for growth. So what Celia was saying before about attracting the private sector, I would say let's attract, but let's also design and work with them, because we have so much to learn from them and so much to give to each other. So the magic wand is, let's truly work together. Let's not only dream of collaboration, but let's make that collaboration substantial, evidence-based, and real, very concrete for the people that we aim to help.
Thank you both. Some super thoughts, and I'm reminded of a song from the 1970s entitled "Let's Work Together," and that seems to be a good kind of banner for what we're talking about. But most important, what this podcast is about is trying to stimulate and continue the conversations that might enable that. Thank you both for your contribution here. I think it's really opened up this question of financing and funding. Thanks very much.